My name is Natalia Zagorska-Thomas and I'm an artist and a textile conservator. I work freelance, which means that I might work for national museums or national trust properties, private clients, private studios. And over the last 4 years, most of the time I've worked for Zenzi Tinker Textile Conservation in Brighton. I studied art first, and as an artist, I'm interested in resurrecting old, everyday, broken things. That just seems to be my instinct as much as anything else. I find and collect things that are no longer useful and no longer valued. They're not particularly beautiful sometimes, they don't have any status, that is obvious. And so perhaps it's a psychological tendency. And I didn't know there was such a profession as conservation, so I came to it much later. I studied it in my 30s. I simply didn't know that there was a job where you could preserve and protect old things and get paid for it. I specialize in textile conservation, which involves a huge amount of material culture because it involves costume, furniture, carpets, tapestries, contemporary artworks with textile elements, anything that's woven or made of fiber, really. The conservation that I do really depends on what the object is and what the meaning of the object is. Because objects have no intrinsic value in themselves, they only make sense in terms of what information the viewer is getting from the object. So my job can involve very practical aspects such as stitching or cleaning an object or documenting and researching an object in order to determine how to conserve it. That's very important. But it can also involve very non-invasive techniques where the science comes to the fore a little bit more. So again, it very much depends on the object and its specific needs. So, for example, I'm working on an object at the moment and it's an early American flag. And this particular object has had hundreds and hundreds of hours of very careful conservation spent on it. And really, in a way, you might not necessarily at a glance be able to tell, because at the very beginning it was full of holes, and now that the conservation is finished, it's also completely full of holes. Because the decision has been made that what's important about this object is its own history, and the evidence that time has passed and that things have happened to this flag in its lifetime is very much part of its meaning to us today. Whereas another object, such as one of the costumes that I conserved, which was a ballet costume from Diaghilev's Ballet, Russes, was conserved in a completely different way. It was a tunic from one of the attendants of a temple in one of the ballets called Le Dieu Bleu. And we could have gone two ways with this conservation. One could have decided that it's the history of the costume that's important and preserved a lot of the damage and the repairs. And some of them have been retained. But actually what we decided that what's important about that object is the artist's original intention. Because we know the artist, it was Leon Bakst, he's famous. And it was felt by the client that it is being able to see what Leon Bakst wanted this costume to look like in context with the set design, with the choreography, with the music, is what was important about this object. So principles of conservation about reversibility and all sorts of other things and ethics of conservation were followed, but it's the visual look of the object that was considered very important. Well, I was an artist before I was a conservator. And as an artist, the biggest influence on my work was a Polish theatre director and an artist himself. His name was Tadeusz Kantor. And He said once that an object exists between eternity and the rubbish heap. And I suppose that within that is the very basis of both my conservation practice and my art practice. But what's interesting there for me as an artist is the tension between these two professions. I can go nuts with the ideas that are involved. And so the conceit for me is that I am helping objects which are no longer useful to evolve in order to survive, to remain relevant to us for now. And so some of the pieces speak directly about the idea of collections, about collecting things, because that's always a choice. Things just get picked out of obscurity, put somewhere, and suddenly they develop a new relevance, which they may have not had previously. It's a good idea to maybe volunteer in an institution or museum or National Trust property or some other place with a collection, just to get a feel of what that profession might involve before committing themselves. And it will probably be required for any training that the person had done this beforehand. Because really, it's quite good to be a little bit obsessive when you're a conservator. Apart from the practical skills and the intellectual abilities, you also have to have certain personality traits to do this job.